Let us pause for a moment and turn inward. Close your eyes, listen to your breath, and ask yourself, why does the mind often feel heavy, as though lost in a fog that never clears? We move through life chasing dreams, clinging to expectations, and fearing the unknown. We believe happiness lies just beyond the horizon, waiting in the form of success, possessions, or security. But have you ever stopped to wonder, are we truly pursuing the light, or are we chasing shimmering illusions that flicker briefly in the vast darkness? In Buddhism, this darkness is called avidya, or ignorance. It is not merely a lack of knowledge, but a fundamental misunderstanding of the true nature of reality. We see the impermanent as permanent, the fleeting as lasting, and the illusory as real. This ignorance binds us to suffering, much like a moth drawn to a flame, unaware of the pain that awaits. It clouds our vision, convincing us that we are separate from the world, that our worth is defined by our accomplishments, and that the self is a solid, unchanging entity. Consider the story of a man walking through the forest at dusk. In the dim light, he stumbles upon a snake coiled on the path. Fear grips him. His heart races, and he steps back, paralyzed by the sight of the serpent. But as the moon rises, its light reveals the truth. The snake is nothing more than a rope lying in the dirt. This man's fear was born not from the rope itself, but from his misunderstanding of what lay before him. Similarly, our suffering is not inherent in life, but arises from our misperceptions, from the stories we tell ourselves about the world and our place in it. Ignorance often manifests as attachment and aversion. We cling to what we desire, fearing its loss, and we push away what we dislike, fearing its presence. Imagine holding a burning coal, intending to throw it at someone who has wronged you. The Buddha taught that in doing so, it is your own hand that burns. This is the nature of ignorance. It blinds us to the reality that our attachments and aversions only deepen our suffering. But ignorance is not our enemy. It is simply the absence of wisdom, much like darkness is the absence of light. The Buddha compared our ignorance to a cloud-covered sky. No matter how thick the clouds may seem, the sun is always present above them. Similarly, the truth is always within us, waiting to be revealed when we lift the veil of misunderstanding. The first step toward awakening is recognizing this ignorance and its pervasive grip on our lives. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." That word, for many of us, begins with awareness. Awareness that we have been navigating life like a traveler without a map, chasing shadows instead of light. Awareness that our perceptions are not always aligned with reality. This is the seed of awakening. A willingness to see things as they truly are. To illustrate, let us consider a candle in a dark room. When unlit, the room remains shrouded in shadow. But the moment the flame is sparked, even the smallest light begins to dispel the darkness. The candle does not eliminate the room's boundaries or obstacles, but it allows us to navigate them with clarity. In the same way, the light of wisdom does not remove life's challenges, but transforms the way we see and respond to them. The Buddha often used the metaphor of a lotus flower to describe the journey out of ignorance. The lotus grows in muddy water, rising above the murk to bloom in pristine beauty. Like the lotus, we too have the capacity to transcend the mud of ignorance. Another practice is cultivating pratitya samutpada, the principle of dependent origination. This teaching reveals that all phenomena arise in dependence upon causes and conditions. Nothing exists independently. Everything is interconnected. Understanding this dissolves the illusion of separateness, helping us see that our pain and joy are tied to the collective experiences of all beings. This realization not only frees us from ignorance, but also inspires compassion for others. Finally, we must embrace the practice of letting go. In the words of the Buddha, just as a snake sheds its skin, we must shed our past over and over again. Letting go does not mean indifference or avoidance. It means releasing the grip of attachment and aversion so that we can experience life with an open heart. It means loving deeply without clinging and grieving losses without despair. Awakening is not an instant transformation, but a gradual unfolding, much like the rising of the sun. It begins in darkness, with the faintest glimmers of light breaking through. Slowly, as the light grows stronger, the world around us comes into focus, and we begin to see clearly for the first time. The Buddha taught that within each of us lies this potential for awakening, the capacity to illuminate the path not just for ourselves, but for all beings. So, let us ask ourselves, are we ready to take that first step toward the light? Are we willing to confront the darkness of ignorance, not with fear, but with curiosity? For in doing so, we may discover that the light we have been searching for was never out there. It has been within us all along, waiting patiently for us to turn inward and see. Awakening begins not with a grand revelation, but with a subtle shift. Like the faint glow of dawn breaking through the darkest night, it often starts as a question, a quiet, persistent wonder. Is this all there is? This glimmer of awareness might come unexpectedly, during a moment of stillness, or in the aftermath of loss and pain. It is the instant when we begin to notice the cracks in the illusions we've clung to, revealing glimpses of a deeper truth beneath the surface. In Buddhism, this first spark is often likened to the opening of an eye that has long been closed. It is the realization that what we have taken for reality is, in fact, a projection of our own fears, desires, and misunderstandings. The Buddha described this moment as recognizing the nature of impermanence. We begin to see that everything we hold dear, our possessions, relationships, even our bodies, is subject to change. Like sand slipping through our fingers, nothing stays as it is forever. Consider the story of Kisa Gotami, a grieving mother who approached the Buddha after the death of her child. Desperate to bring her child back, she begged the Buddha for a miracle. He instructed her to find a mustard seed from a household that had never experienced loss. She knocked on door after door, only to find that sorrow and death had touched every family. Slowly, her heart softened, and she realized that loss is not a punishment, but a universal truth. This was her first glimmer of awakening, the understanding that suffering arises not from life itself, but from our attachment to what is impermanent. This initial awareness is often accompanied by discomfort, even fear. As we begin to question the foundations of our identity, the ego resists. It clings to its stories, whispering that without these roles, titles, and possessions, we are nothing. But awareness, once kindled, cannot be extinguished. It gently invites us to look deep. This first glimmer is a gift, an invitation to step onto the path of awakening. It is not always comfortable or easy, but it is profoundly liberating. It is the moment we begin to see that the light we seek is not outside us, but within, patiently, waiting to guide us home. Imagine a quiet morning just before dawn. The world is shrouded in darkness, but somewhere on the horizon, a faint glow begins to emerge. It's subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but as the moments pass, the light grows stronger, revealing the contours of a world that had been hidden in shadow. This is how the first glimmer of awareness feels. A quiet, profound realization that shifts everything. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It sneaks in gently, like the first breath of fresh air after a storm. But in that moment, something inside us stirs, and we begin to see the world differently. Awakening often begins with a question, a simple yet life-changing inquiry. Is this all there is? For years, perhaps decades, we may have moved through life on autopilot, chasing achievements, clinging to possessions, and fearing change. But then, something shifts. It could be a loss that cracks our heart open, a moment of stillness when the noise of the world fades, or even the realization that what we've been chasing hasn't brought us the peace we hoped for. Whatever sparks it, this moment is a gift. It is the universe whispering to us, there is more. Look deeper. This first glimmer of awareness is a crack in the walls of illusion that have confined us. In Buddhism, this is called avidya, or Ignorance. Not the absence of knowledge, but a misunderstanding of reality itself. We mistake the temporary for the eternal, the fleeting for the lasting. We cling to people, things, and even identities, believing they define us. But this glimmer invites us to question, what if these things are not who I truly am? What if there's a deeper truth waiting to be discovered? Think of Prince Siddhartha, who would become the Buddha. For much of his life, he lived in luxury, sheltered from the realities of suffering. But one day, he stepped outside the palace walls and saw the truth of life. Aging, sickness, death, and a wandering monk seeking peace. These sights stirred something deep within him, a longing to understand, to uncover the truth beneath the surface. That moment of recognition, of questioning, was the first step on his journey to enlightenment. For many of us, the first glimmer of awareness can feel unsettling when we begin to see the impermanence of all things, our relationships, our possessions, even our bodies. It can create fear. The ego resists, clinging tightly to the identities and attachments it has built. It whispers, without these things, who am I? But awareness, once awakened, is like a seed that has been planted. It cannot be unplanted. It invites us to grow, to lean into the discomfort and discover the deeper truths that await. Picture a river at dawn. In the darkness, it seems still and lifeless. But as the sun begins to rise, its light reveals the ripples, the movement, and the life within the water. Awareness works the same way. It doesn't change reality. It changes how we see reality. It reveals the interconnectedness, the flow, and the beauty that were always there, hidden beneath the surface. This first spark of awareness is not the end. It is the beginning of a great journey. The Buddha often spoke of impermanence, not to evoke despair, but to awaken us to the preciousness of each moment. When we see clearly that everything is fleeting, we stop taking life for granted. We begin to cherish the present, to love without clinging, and to live with an open heart. Take, for example, the story of Kisa Gotami, a grieving mother who approached the Buddha after losing her only child. Desperate for relief, she begged him to bring her child back to life. The Buddha, in his compassion, told her to find a mustard seed from a household that had never experienced loss. She searched tirelessly, but every family she met had their own stories of grief and sorrow. Awareness is an invitation, a chance to step beyond the small confines of our ego and glimpse the vastness of existence. It is a reminder that we are not separate from the world, but deeply intertwined with it. The light we seek is not something we must find. It is something we must uncover, for it has always been within us. So, take a deep breath and pause. Look around you, not with the eyes of habit, but with the eyes of wonder. Notice the way the sunlight dances on the leaves, the way the air feels against your skin, the sound of your breath moving in and out. These moments, fleeting as they are, contain the seeds of awakening. And as you embrace this awareness, let it guide you, like the first rays of dawn, illuminating the path toward a life of clarity, peace, and boundless possibility. As the first glimmer of awareness grows, it shines a light on the parts of ourselves we often avoid, the attachments, fears, and desires that we've mistaken for who we are. This is where the real work of awakening begins. The journey beyond the ego is not a straightforward path. It is a winding road filled with challenges, doubts, and moments of resistance. Yet, it is also a journey of profound transformation, one that leads us closer to our true nature. The ego, in its essence, is not an enemy, but a creation of the mind, a collection of identities, labels, and stories we cling to in an effort to define ourselves. I am my job, we tell ourselves. I am my relationships, my achievements, my possessions. These narratives give us a sense of stability, a structure to hold on to in a world of constant change. But when life inevitably disrupts these stories through loss, failure, or change, the ego feels threatened. It resists, clinging even more tightly, creating suffering. The Buddha taught that this clinging is the root of dukkha, or suffering. Imagine a bird trying to fly while clutching a heavy stone in its claws. No matter how hard it flaps its wings, the weight drags it down. In the same way, the ego's attachments prevent us from soaring into the freedom of awakening. To journey beyond the ego is to loosen our grip on the stone, to let go of the weight that holds us back. This letting go is not easy. The ego resists because it fears dissolution. It whispers, "If I am not my possessions, my relationships, or my accomplishments, then who am I?" These moments of doubt are an invitation to explore the deeper truths of existence. The Buddha often used the metaphor of a river to explain this process. The surface of the river, constantly changing with ripples and waves, is like the ego, impermanent and ever-shifting. But beneath the surface lies the deeper current, steady and eternal. To journey beyond the ego is to dive into this deeper current, to connect with the flow of consciousness that transcends individual identity. Consider the story of a monk who carried a heavy bag of stones as part of his meditation practice. One day, his master asked him, "Why do you carry this burden?" The monk replied, "To remind myself of the weight of my attachments." The master smiled and said, "And when will you let it go?" The monk realized in that moment that he didn't need to carry the stones to understand their burden. By releasing them, he experienced the lightness and freedom that had always been within his reach. On this journey, we are called to confront the shadows of our own minds: anger, jealousy, fear, and pride. These emotions, often fueled by the ego, arise not to harm us. The journey beyond the ego is not about erasing it. The ego has its place, helping us navigate the practicalities of life. Instead, it is about recognizing the ego for what it is, a useful tool, but not the entirety of our being. As the Buddha taught, "You are not the drop in the ocean, you are the ocean in a drop." To transcend the ego is to remember this truth, to see ourselves not as isolated individuals, but as expressions of the infinite. And so, we continue the journey. With each moment of mindfulness, each act of letting go, we step further into freedom. The path may be challenging, but it is also beautiful, for it leads us not away from ourselves, but home, to the radiant, unchanging essence that has always been there, waiting for us to remember. As the journey unfolds and we begin to move beyond the confines of the ego, something remarkable happens. Life no longer feels like a struggle to control or possess. Instead, it becomes a dance, a flowing harmony between ourselves and the ever-changing reality around us. This is the stage of integration, where we stop resisting what is and begin to embrace life as it truly unfolds. In Buddhism, this state is often described as living in accordance with the Dharma, the natural law of existence. It is the realization that we are not separate from the world, but deeply interconnected with all things. Like a wave that rises and falls, but never ceases to be part of the ocean, we begin to see ourselves not as isolated beings, but as threads in the vast tapestry of existence. This understanding brings with it a profound sense of peace. The need to fight against the inevitable, change, loss, uncertainty, falls away, and we learn to flow with life instead of against it. To illustrate this, imagine a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. For the caterpillar, the cocoon may have seemed like the end, a loss of everything it knew. But in truth, it was a transformation, a release from one form of existence into another, more expansive state. In the same way, when we integrate the truth of impermanence and interconnection, we don't lose ourselves. Instead, we expand, shedding the confines of the ego to embrace a fuller, freer way of being. The Buddha often spoke of mindfulness as the key to this integration. When we are fully present, we no longer cling to the past or grasp at the future. Each moment becomes enough, a perfect expression of life's unfolding. Imagine walking through a garden in full bloom. If your mind is caught in regrets about yesterday or worries about tomorrow, you miss the beauty before you, the colors, the fragrance, the song of birds. But when you are mindful, the garden comes alive, and so do you. Integration also brings a profound sense of compassion. When we see ourselves as part of the whole, the suffering of others is no longer separate from our own. Acts of kindness and service flow naturally from this understanding. We no longer give to receive or love to possess. Instead, we act from a place of abundance, knowing that in serving others, we are also serving ourselves. The conclusion: life as a journey of becoming. And so, we arrive at a profound truth. Life is not a fixed destination, but a journey of becoming. The end of one chapter is always the beginning of another, just as the setting sun makes way for the dawn. The Buddha taught that impermanence is not something to fear, but to embrace, for it is the source of life's beauty and vitality. A flower is precious because it blooms for only a short while. A sunset is breathtaking because it fades into night. When we see life through the lens of impermanence, interconnection, and mindfulness, we are freed from the chains of fear and attachment.